Hello and welcome to our quick guide for the EVA1. It's a quick guide just for our live production use, so it's a very powerful kind of mini cinema camera, and its strengths lie other places, but we, out of necessity, will use it also for our live services, our live production as well. So for that we have our rig, and first we'll put our V-mount battery in the back. If I can figure out. That was a little harder than I thought, and that will probably power up the monitor right away. And we also have, if you can see, we are running our power to our camera as well in there. I haven't switched the camera on yet. But we also have a internal battery that we will try to charge up before every service as well, in case this one runs out. We still have this battery that will keep going, and it should be able to feed to our switcher just fine out of this SDI port here. But yeah, we will try that. So our power is right here. Switch this forward. And it'll boot up, and it's up and running. You can see the display come alive up there. Let's focus on that, and we can focus here with this guy. Depending on preference of the user, or whether they want to use this follow focus device. It doesn't have to be rigged up, but it can also be flipped around and mounted on the other side of the lens as well, if it's easier for the user. Now it depends on what lens we use as well. Right now we have the 85mm on. Let's focus back up again. And so you can see that this gear is turning the gear that's on the big focus ring. So then let's talk right about exposure right away here. So our first point of exposure is our iris, or our aperture. I don't know if you can see in there. It's probably a little bit difficult to see, but you can see our aperture ring deep in there. It will go from, on this lens, it's 1.4 all the way up to f16. Now if you go all the way, it will lock and it won't go back. There's a tiny little button that it's really hard to see right here, and that will allow you to go back down. Not sure exactly the reason for that, but yeah, you can go back and forth without pressing the button unless you go all the way to f16. So that is one of our useful things. Again, we might go mostly wide open on it, and that is our iris/aperture. Now, our next step would be our ND filters. And you can see right on here, we have a label, and you go down. This would be, if you go all the way down, it is completely no ND filters. Now, if I press up, there's about 3 different options. And you can see on the screen, maybe out of the peripheral vision here, that as I go up, it's adding darkness. A little window comes in front, and so that's our darkest we can possibly get. Which, again, indoors we probably will not be using, but it's handy to know where it is, or if it gets bumped, you know that you can change it. And now we also have another thing to keep your eyes open for, is if you're making adjustments and nothing's working, it might be because we have these buttons locked down, which could be really useful in case. So you don't want to bump anything, just flip that, and then anything that you do here will not work because the camera is locked and you're not going to accidentally hit any of these buttons. So that's one thing to check if nothing's working for your adjustments. Our next thing after ND filters would be our shutter speed. Now we're 180 degrees, so here's another super useful button here, is if we press the home button right there, and that brings up on the display basically all of our details. Let's focus on there. And so, first of all, we can see our shutter speed or shutter angle is 180 degrees, and that's where we want it to stay. Now, if it wasn't on that, you could change it by actually just pressing that button. So the home button is really useful because it shows you everything, but it also you can make your adjustments. So you could, I think you can use your wheel here to make adjustments. Right, just select, click it in, you can select your value, and then you can go up or down. Half shutter is 180 degrees, so we'll leave it locked on that because that's what we want. We want to make sure it stays on 180 degrees. So we'll exit out of that. And now so after a shutter, we have our ISO or our gain. So now this is where you get a few more options with this specific camera because it has dual native ISOs or ISOs. And so it means that it works optimally with your best dynamic range and least amount of noise at both 800 and 2500 ISO. So that's where you have to choose. So it's kind of a two-step process. So right now we're on the base ISO of 2500. If you can see on there. But then we're at the actual ISO of 4000, which is probably a bit too hot. So one option is to adjust that, is to press on it, and then use your wheel down here to select your ISO that you want to adjust, and you can go up or down in reasonable increments. So down to 2000. And so you can get on the 800 base ISO, you can get up to 2000, whereas the 2500 you can get, I don't know, down to, let's see, down all the way to 640 potentially. So depending on where we're normally running it, we may want to stick with the 2500 base just so we have our versatility there. So then you could press this in to select it, and you could exit out there. If you wanted to change the base, you could click on the base, and you have a choices of 800 base, 2500 base, or I think they have a third option of just say native only, which means that you can't adjust beyond 800 or 2500. You're locked into one of those two. And there's reasons for that, just if you need it to always stay with the exact same characteristic of noise and dynamic range. But we will probably stick with 2500 because we're indoors and we probably need the extra light. And then from there we would change our ISO and adjust it maybe down to 1600 or whatever we need. And so we can exit out of there. Now, another way we can do this is on here, we actually have a switch, which is really useful because this switch determines what you can adjust with this dial here. And so a quick way is to have this switch down to ISO decibel, like so your actual gain level, and we could then always be able to adjust on the fly. Now I think because we have our home screen open right now, it is navigating through here, but if I exit the home screen, this dial, you might have to take my word for it, will now adjust going down to 1000. You can see it adjusting the darkness and brightness of our screen by, so you can tell that it's working whether or not you can see the numbers. And so that's our gain settings on there. Really handy. So that's our exposure. Those are all our options. So for the most part on this, you will be probably adjusting your aperture, either maybe wanting to keep it pretty wide open for subject isolation and just to get a maximum amount of light, and then really making your adjustments probably with your ISO. Now if you need to fine tune it, maybe we need to use a bit more aperture, but those are basically our options here. If we're just dealing with too much light, then you might add an ND filter and then work off of that. So aside from exposure settings, we also have our white balance. Again, you can see that there's a quick switch to get to your white balance, and then this dial would deal with that. Basically this will cycle through some presets. You can see it changing the color on the screen right here. Now what we would have is we would, if we can see on the screen, it's going through our A preset, our B preset, and then some. Basically, we can just add as many number choices on there as we want. And so it's just going through some pre-selected numbers that we decided to put into that menu. We're just going to quickly go do an overview of the things that you should see in your screen right here. So even if you don't press the home screen, there should still be a display. And you should always see 180 degrees, otherwise we need to fix our shutter angle. You should see an ISO of, well, the ISO, you should just get a proper exposure with it. So we'll typically have that front switch, user switch set to ISO, so you can kind of use that dial to go up or down. And then this should always be on A, or A preset. So I should say A, and then probably something around 3500 plus. And it'll have a specific white balance that we will custom set to get our whites to look white. The other thing that we should show you is the stabilizer, how to adjust focal length. Say you switch a lens, you need to reset the electronic image stabilizer depending on what your focal length is. First of all, if you can see this button, EIS, it's a quick way to turn on and off the stabilizer. So if you're on a tripod, you don't need it on, and so you could go like this, and you know basically if it's on or not. In the bottom right corner it says EIS if it's on, right in there. And if it's off, I'll zoom in. And if it's off, it'll kind of zoom out a little bit because it crops in the image a little bit to stabilize. Now, if we need to adjust the stabilizer, we can do it in the menu. And then we go down to camera settings. You can push in the wheel, and then it's EIS. And you can see that it's off there. But we can, if we've switched lens to, like, I'm going to switch to a 35mm lens. You can do that right here and select it, and then we're done. So then we go out of our menu, and now I'll show you how to switch the lenses as well. Is you would go, if you have this on, then we need to, there's a wheel underneath that you can see there, and we have to loosen that. That allows you to pull away the gear. And there's another wheel right there to loosen. This will allow you to take it off. This is also good to know in case you would find it easier to use the follow focus on the other side of the lens. So I can pull it out. I could mount it to the other side in this way and line up the gears. But if we are just taking off the lens, there's that button there. We can see a button on the side. That's the button there, is releasing the lens. Push it in, and you can rotate to the counterclockwise, and you can pull it off. And it's in reverse to put it on, until it clicks into place. And that's it. Thanks for joining us.